A really warm welcome to this final webinar. And we've been on a journey together for a year now. And at the start of that journey, I promised that we would explore this question of what does it mean to live our lives well? And how can mindfulness provide us with some of the skills and some of the attitudes and some of the capacities to live our lives well? And what I hope is that these last 12 months have supported us in this kind of waking up, this learning to anchor, this befriending our minds and bodies, this appreciation of the kind of miraculousness of our lives, as well as the kind of ability to navigate the turbulence, maybe see things more clearly and respond with a sense of wisdom. So the kind of phrase I want to kind of invoke throughout this webinar is Gandhi's phrase: how can we be the change we want to see in the world? And what I want to do is break that down into three parts. First, how can we see the change in ourselves? Then, how can we see the change in our relationships and in all of the people around us and how we are with them? And then third, how can we see that change in our wider world, the parts of the world that we are a part of and that we are shaped by and that we shape? And crucially, what I want to do in this webinar, much more than in any of the previous webinars, is let the voices of Sophia, a woman in her 60s, Ling, a woman in her 40s, Mohammed, a man in his 30s, and Sam, a man in his 20s, speak for themselves through the stories of their lives, their learning, their extraordinary courageousness. So what we'll be doing is listening a lot to their experience and what's happened for them and how that's manifesting in their life. So as we start, just have a sense of really coming into your body and having a sense of, in the trunk of your body, kind of getting a sense of the breath in the trunk of your body and the movement of the breath, perhaps in the belly or the chest, as the trunk of the body expands on the in-breath and maybe drops and contracts a little bit on the out-breath. Sense of coming home to the body. And maybe expanding out now to a sense of the whole body. So maybe particularly the kind of rootedness of if you're sitting, the sitting bones and the feet on the chair, on the ground. The arms and the head, a sense of being held by and carried by the trunk of your body, like branches of a tree, reaching out. And just see if you can bring to mind again this question: what does this mean for me? A life well lived. What does that look like? What does that feel like? What do I see? What do I do? What do I experience? What do other people see? What do they experience if I'm living my life well? And what does it look like for the people around me, the people I love, the people who are in my life? And what does it look like in the wider world? The world that I'm a part of, that I'm shaped by and that I shape. And I'll just keep coming back to this again and again in the next minutes of this webinar. And I'm going to move now into the first part, being the change in ourselves. What I hope I've tried to communicate through these webinars and I think for many of you will be anyway the case that your practice is like a best friend. It's something that you have alongside you that adapts through your life, and you know it's something you can come back to that supports you. And what I'd like to just kind of suggest in this part, and I'm going to draw a little bit on one of the characters, Sophia, who's been practicing for some 20, 30 years. And the way she describes it is when she first was introduced to mindfulness and some of these ideas, when she started out her career as a teacher, she thought it was all just a bit kind of, yeah, she didn't have time for it. It was all just a bit out there. Yes, she kind of got it, but it wasn't something that she really kind of introduced into her life. But over time, she started to maybe just try some of the ideas and find them useful, and some of the practices she found useful. And she noticed, for example, that she wasn't particularly in tune with her body. That when people said, I'm a yoga teacher or I'm a dancer, and that our relationship with our body is really important. Sophia would go, I don't really get that. And so she developed a sort of a movement practice, a yoga practice, and qigong, and that for a period of time in her life really developed a sense of befriending her body. And then when she had young children, there were whole periods of time where she was just tired and had absolutely no time for some form of more a mindfulness practice, formal mindfulness practice, I should say. But nonetheless, she had a sense of it was there. It was in the background and in small moments. For example, when breastfeeding, she was able to actually just come back to her body and that moment. And that became a part of her practice in those years of being a young mother. And then she describes later, when the children were a bit older and when her teaching career was taking off, that she started to develop a more sustainable practice, a deeper practice, and some greater insights and wisdom and understanding emerged. And then later she talks about how she adapted her practice through really important transitions in her life, becoming a widow, becoming unwell with Parkinson's, and knowing that it was there as a friend to her, that actually having some deep capacity to grieve with awareness, move in, lean in, and step back was part of love, grief, and loving again. So all I'm saying, which I think is really kind of in the DNA of practice, is that if we think of mindfulness practice as a lifelong practice, we come to see it as evolving and growing and emerging through different phases of our life. And that's okay. And that's good. And that's mindfulness for life. This sense of trusting that I know what I need in this moment and what I might need this week and in this year of my life and in this transition in my life and this phase of life. So I want to give voice in a moment to Sophia, again, the woman in her 60s, and Ling, the woman in her 40s who has a history of depression and quite a lot of early adversity in just a moment. I'm going to listen to the video clips. But just before I do that, I want to just talk about this idea of mindfulness becoming integrated into our life and it becoming a part of our life. And invoke the way Benjamin Zander talks about this in the way in which people learn music. So he describes, and apparently this is true with many forms of, expertise. It's not quite the right word, but music's a good metaphor, I think. When we're first learning a musical instrument, it's really hard and it's quite strained. And if you ever listen to a child or a person beginning to learn the violin or the trumpet, it's really, it's not pleasurable to listen to. The person's really struggling to master the instrument and to all the kind of basics of the music. And then reading the music and playing the music is quite labored and it becomes then maybe a little bit more smooth, but it's quite easily derailed by a mistake or overthinking. But what's so beautiful about that kind of evolution of music and a musician is that over time, that expertise becomes really internalized, almost kind of automatic and habitual. And it's as if the music is flowing through the musician. And you might have experienced that at a concert or listening to some music on Spotify or anywhere else, that there's just a sense of the music is just playing itself through the band, through the orchestra, through the musician, whatever it might be. And I think this is this idea of mindfulness for life becoming almost like a sort of embodied quality, that there's a sort of sense that in a moment of responding wisely, it becomes more and more embodied who we are, more and more naturalized, if you like. And I don't want to idealize it because it's always a kind of journey. And I think that's what you're going to hear now from Sophia and Ling as they describe part of their experience. So let's see if we can get the tapes up and listen to their experience.
I was walking Rufus on the beach. There was this woman, about my age, doing the same, throwing sticks into the surf for her dog to retrieve. Well, my dog wanted to play and was chasing the stick, too. The woman seemed not to care that Rufus had invaded her game. Then, to my horror, Rufus crouched down at the water's edge and emptied his bowels. I was mortified, not just because it was right by this woman and there were swimmers and surfers, but also because I had forgotten the bags to clear up his mess. Without pause, she used one of her bags and picked up my dog's mess. I went up to her, expecting her to be rightly angry with me, and I was ready to apologize unreservedly. She waved away my apologies, smiled, passed me the bag, and said, "Don't worry about it. We can't control when our dogs decide to empty their bowels." It was an extraordinary turning point for me to see someone I could identify with so accepting, so kind, so non-judgmental.
When I am stuck in depression, it is like a swamp, darkness, and a sense of rotting. My closest friends know to ask, "Ling, are you in your swamp?" We went on a family trip recently and visited a rainforest. It was beautiful. But what struck me most was that the swamp is incredible. It gives life to all the tropical flowers, insects, and animals that live there. Also, the swamp is an essential part of a larger rainforest that turns our CO2 emissions back into oxygen. I try to remind myself that the swamp is just a small part of who I am, and I can step back and see the whole beautiful forest.
I love those two accounts from Sophia and Ling. And what they're describing is a really changed relationship to their body and mind. And we talked in one of the earlier webinars about this idea of befriending, that we're moving alongside and befriending our bodies and minds. And I think that's what you're hearing with Sophia and Ling. And I think that's the work of a lifetime, isn't it? For us to befriend our minds and bodies, to see the kind of many myriad parts of our minds and bodies and the extraordinary whole with a sense of, there you are. Ah, good enough. Okay. The same way we talk to a lifelong best friend. So in the second part of the webinar, I want to transition now to being the change we'd like to see in the world, moving from ourselves to other people, to our relationships. And I think one of the things that kind of psychologists have argued, and our and others' research is beginning to bear out, is that our capacity to bring awareness and friendliness to ourselves is the same capacity that we have to bring awareness and friendliness and care to other people. If we can meet our own suffering with compassion, if we can meet the beauty in our life with appreciation and savoring, if we can find a way of navigating through friction with wisdom, if we can bring tenderness and intimacy to our own experience, we can bring it to our relationships. Just consider the first thing that comes to mind, or the kind of stereotypes, if you like, that come to mind if I name some of the major transitions that we have in life. What are the stereotypes that we have that come to mind? Puberty, becoming sexually active, midlife, menopause, retirement, moving into assisted living. So with puberty, for example, we think perhaps of kind of awkwardness and all of the challenges of navigating that kind of hormonal and biological change in our lives. Midlife, the phrase midlife crisis, menopause, hot flushes, sleeplessness, changes, moving into assisted living, lots of perhaps negative connotations. But if we bring awareness and a sense of this befriending to each of these transitions, they become something very different. They become a place for curiosity, for interest, for courage, for letting go, for leaning in. It just, in the same way we heard with Sophia and Ling just now, with the roofers on the beach and Ling and her swamp, we can bring a different frame, a different perspective to these transitions in our lives. And again, I want to give voice to Ling, first of all. She's going to be describing her relationship with her daughter. And then you'll hear Sophia describing her work as a teacher. Then you'll hear Mohammed talking about an encounter with a young Muslim man on a bridge. And then you'll hear Sam talking about his body image and becoming sexually active. So all of the things I've just been describing, you'll hear their actual experience. And people have sometimes asked me, how did I create these 4 characters which appear in the book Mindfulness for Life? But actually, in my book with Christina Feldman, we use the same 4 characters, and we develop them in that book as well. In the book I'm writing currently with Ruth Bayer and Paul Bernard, which is a teacher manual for MBCT for Life, the 4 characters are developed further. So what I'd say just before you listen to this is all of these examples and all of these experiences are based on actual things, either from people's lives who I know or clients I've worked with or my own life. So all of them are things that I've experienced directly or indirectly or witnessed in other people. So let's hear from Ling and then Sophia and then Mohammed and then Sam.
My teenage daughter was eating her breakfast, watching a show on her laptop computer, while also texting a boy. It was 10 minutes until she would need to head out the door to catch the bus to school. She'd left the bathroom light on, and there was a wet towel on the floor. The fridge was ajar, a container of milk was out on the counter, and a cereal box was open. I felt a wave of irritation and an impulse to say, "You have 10 minutes to eat your breakfast, and then I need you to clean up after yourself in the bathroom and kitchen." When I was her age, I was living in foster care. This tripped my irritation into anger and the impulse to nag into an impulse to lash out. "What the hell do you think you're doing? I am not your slave. You're not leaving this trail of destruction for me to clean up when you go to school." I don't really know how, but I knew in that moment in my gut that if I said the words on the tip of my tongue, my daughter would roll her eyes, say something rude under her breath, make a half-hearted attempt to put a few things away, and then head out the door without a goodbye, leaving a dark cloud of resentment behind her. I felt helpless, and my mind started to go down a spiral of negative thinking. I'm a terrible parent. When she leaves, I'm going to get back into bed. I bit my tongue, knowing that this was not a fight worth picking. As my daughter headed out the door, I said, "Have a good day, I love you." And she looked back and smiled, saying, "Thanks, you too." She was oblivious to the drama playing out in my mind or the mess she was leaving behind. But when the door closed, I felt relief that I hadn't lashed out. That evening after school, I gave my daughter a ride to a friend's house. In the car, she opened up about what was on her mind, and I gave her lots of space and just listened. Driving home, I felt pleased and proud of my daughter. She is so much more together than I was at her age.
So we're going to run straight into Sophia now, talking about her teaching and creating a sanctuary in her classroom.
I was a good teacher. One of the most important things I did in my career was creating classrooms that were safe and fun. I don't want to be immodest, but I was good at it. Not only was this essential for the kids to learn, but for many, I know my classroom was a sanctuary. For some, school wasn't fun. For others, home wasn't safe. I hope in some small way I gave these kids a sanctuary. Some of my former students keep in touch. One runs a boxing gym, and I know he runs it the same way. A lot of the kids in our community go there because it's home. I noticed toward the end of my career that schools became more and more pressured as assessments and exams became the be-all and end-all. One of the effects for us as teachers is that this pressure played out in every part of school life. It made creating a sanctuary in my classroom all the more important, and my peer group of senior teacher friends was also my sanctuary. That's part of why I didn't burn out or leave like so many of my colleagues.
I was driving over the main bridge over the river when I saw this young man. Something wasn't right. When I looked again, I saw he was on the outside of the guardrail facing the river. I pulled over and walked over, taking care not to get too close. He was a young man, Muslim, South Asian, dressed in a tracksuit, expensive trainers. Another older white guy came up too and was on the other side of him. We both started to talk to him. It seemed natural, knowing what to say, sensing not to pressure him. But I could see he could jump at any moment. Somehow, the other guy and I were on the same page. At a certain moment, we both nodded and quickly grabbed him and dragged him over the guardrail to safety. He started to wail like an animal, and the two of us just stood there holding him and talking to him. I could feel he had nothing on him, no bag or phone. He'd been serious about jumping. By now, some other cars had stopped and someone had called the emergency services, which came not long after. They took over and took him to the psychiatric emergency room. The other guy and I stopped and talked for a while, and as we said goodbye, we embraced even though we'd never met before. 20 minutes in my life where it felt like everything I'd come to understand from my Muslim faith, my mindfulness practice, my own life flowed naturally.
And we're going to flow straight through to Sam now, a young man in his 20s.
Back in the day, they called me Skinny Sam. Seeing all the sporty boys and jocks in my school made me feel kinda inadequate. Well, you can imagine when I first started being attracted to men. I was worried that no one would find me attractive. Then I got together with this guy, one of my first partners. He was more experienced than me. I adored the guy, and he made me feel safe as I explored my sexuality. When we had sex, he loved my body and would tell me so. He dropped this bomb that my body shape was a particular tribe in the gay community. I wasn't Skinny Sam wearing baggy clothes. Boom! I was a twink. Seeing my body through his eyes, seeing he wanted me as I am, did wonders for how I feel about my body. Years of wishing I looked more like the sporty, popular guys at school went out the window. I switched up my wardrobe and started to strut my stuff a bit more. And you know what? Turns out it wasn't just him who found me attractive. That was a good feeling.
So what we've heard from Ling navigating, as any parent of a teenager navigates with their teenage child, moments of irritation, anger even. Sophia in her work, Mohammed in that really kind of critical moment with a suicidal young man on Donington Bridge in Oxford, and Sam and his emerging sexuality, is this sense of our relationships are really a mirror of our relationship with ourselves in both directions. So the love and the climate and the culture of our family, of our workplace, of our school is where we learn our relationship with ourselves. And our relationship with ourselves is the basis for forming a classroom that's safe and secure. A relationship with a daughter, a teenage daughter, that's really different from the one that Ling experienced herself in foster care. Being able to rise to a challenge as Mohammed did. And Sam really transforming his body image in his late teen and early 20s. So in the final part, what I want to do is to transition to the wider world. So we've talked about being the change we'd like to see in ourselves, being the change we'd like to see in our relationships. And what I'd like to do now is talk about being the change we'd like to see in the world. And of course, I'm going to suggest that the same thing applies here. The kind of world that we've experienced up until this point, all of our life experiences, all of the kind of environment and home and school and friendships and relationships we've experienced have framed the possibilities and the life that we've had. And we, in turn, have shaped the lives and the world around us. And that presents a really interesting kind of opportunity, if you like, for us and our mindfulness practice. So in, I think it was 1969, Lauren Isley published a book called The Star Thrower, which has often been cited by lots of different people in different contexts. And the original book is quite a sort of metaphysical and complex book, but the way it's been interpreted, it's called The Star Thrower. The way it's been interpreted and it's been used in sort of contemporary culture is two people walking along a beach, and there are lots and lots of starfish that have been left on the beach as the tide has gone out, and they're still alive. And one of the two people on the beach picks up a starfish and throws it into the sea, and another, and throws it into the sea, and another, and throws it into the sea. And her companion says, "What are you doing? There are so many of these starfish. We can't possibly make a dent." And she replies very simply, "But I'm making a difference to the three that I've thrown in." And in the book itself, it kind of goes further, and it says that, the behaviors behaviors like throwing the starfish, and she's also impacting the man who's with her. And we can have ripple effects and impacts on the world that we can't possibly even imagine or even know. But to bring awareness and to bring intentionality and to bring wise action into small moments in our relationship with the world is kind of radical. And oh my goodness, it is so needed just now. So I just go back and say those three things again: kind of awareness, intention, attitudes, and action. And that's what I've talked about in the previous webinars. And that's what we've been exploring in our practice is, can we become more aware of our values and use that as a kind of a compass, if you like, for our intentionality. So with these starfish, she doesn't want to see them die on the beach. She wants to take some of them and throw them into the water. And in all of these cases where we have a question about our world and our values, we have moments and moments and moments and moments where we can do exactly that with a quality of friendliness, a quality of intentionality and awareness. We can take action. And again, I want to, rather than me talking in the abstract, make this real. And I want to again give voice, in this case, to Ling and Sam and Mohammed and Sophia. And we're going to run straight through if we can. These are about each of them making changes in their lives and at different stages in their life, which is coming from a place of what they've learned through mindfulness. And if you just go back to what I was saying earlier about Benjamin Zander, it's this kind of process of like learning mindfulness in the same way we might learn a musical instrument. Sometimes it feels clumsy and we don't get it quite right and we have to start again. And other times it feels incredibly natural. And other times we just get completely stuck and we don't know what to do. But hopefully these 4 examples from these 4 cases, which again are all based on real world people that have one way or another moved and flowed through my working and personal life. Let's hear what they have to say. So we'll start with Ling, and Ling making a change in her career. And just to remind you, Ling is somebody who has quite an extensive kind of trauma history. And she's working as the reporter in a court, which means day in and day out, she's listening to really quite difficult court cases.
After my divorce, I got a job as a court reporter because the hours worked well with the school day. The work involved listening every day to criminal cases of sexual assault, rape, domestic violence, child abuse, and so on. I used to think that our gallows humor at work and not taking work home protected me from hearing all this stuff day in and day out. But I realized that it was just not a good place for me to work because it was bringing up a lot of memories and feelings. I was living in a state of constant high stress. I was outside the window of what I could manage. It took time, but I took a course in horticulture, worked as a volunteer at the botanical garden, and I loved it. Now I work in a local garden center run by a family who are passionate about gardening. I love learning about plants, flowers, and trees, taking care of them, and helping the customers. I'd like one day to run programs with young people in our garden center, the sort of young people who lose their way, who I used to see in the courts, and who I was too.
It grinds my gears when old people say, the future belongs to young people. Like, hold up, you created this mess, and now you're passing the burning torch to us? I'm all about the environment, and honestly, I am terrified that some really bad things will happen. That's why I bike everywhere and ditched eating red meat. I'm all about people's health and well-being, which is why I chose nursing. But let's be real. Everyone's got a role to play, especially the ones who set it all on fire and have the power to do something about it.
I am taking courses in coaching. I want to coach youth athletics in our Muslim community. Not because I hope to produce elite athletes, but because it's a place where young people can come together and learn so much that prepares them for their lives, about self-respect, discipline, teamwork, and so much more.
And then we're just going to move to Sophia. And this is actually a journal entry from Sophia towards the end of her life.
The last few months of my life have brought me face to face with the questions of what I am proud of in my life, what I regret, and what was on my bucket list. I feel good about my work as a teacher, raising my kids, my marriage, caring for my husband, and, even though it nearly broke me, caring for my mom. I don't regret anything. In the end, I realized that there is only one thing that matters: to love and be loved. And I love seeing my former students, friends, and family passing it on.
So one of the things that I hope mindfulness has brought into each of our lives is our ability to kind of raise our gaze and broaden our awareness and sort of bring a flashlight, if you like, bring an awareness to what's happening in our mind and body, but also what's happening out in the world. And that is what's needed, right? To potentially see those starfish and have the kind of intention, imagination, and creativity to think, I'm going to pick a few of these up and throw them into the sea as a kind of metaphor for other areas of our life. And I feel like, and I think a lot of the data bears this out, particularly with young people. About 1 in 3 young people describes pretty paralyzing levels of what's called climate distress. They really describe what Sam was describing, this sense of I'm really worried about the world and the climate, and I feel really hopeless and helpless, and it's something created by others, and I don't have a sense of agency. And I think one of the things that we're trying and hoping we can do with our practice is to have that sense of the same thing. If I can bring awareness and intentionality and care to myself, and then I can bring it to other people with this raised gaze and this broadened awareness, and I have this sense of making a difference in the world. And very small things, if we collectively do that, can shift from this helplessness and hopelessness to a sense of optimism, a sense of agency, a sense of change. And my goodness, do we need that in the world just now? We can't save every starfish, we can't solve everything, but with a sense of values, a sense of awareness, we can make a difference. We can be the change potentially that we want to see in the world. So I want to just close with a practice. And it's the kind of tree practice that we visited again and again, but I want to bring it to kind of bring everything together, if you like, in the practice. So just having a sense of invoking a tree that that has a sense of rootedness, uprightness, dignity, strength, and flexibility. And have a sense of yourself as that tree, rooted, strong, moving trunk that can flex, branches and leaves and foliage reaching out to the sun and to the light. To see if you can really feel into, have a sense of experiencing yourself as being rooted. And your roots going into the ground. It's like your value system. The things that are meaningful and important to you, they're like your root system. Connected to something larger, nourishing you, supporting you. And up through the roots come this sense of intentionality, this sense of purpose, this sense of meaning in your life. And it flows into the trunk. Up through the trunk. With some of the bigger trees, you can actually put your ear to the tree, sometimes with a kind of like amplifier, and you can hear the whoosh of the fluid moving up through the trees. A sense of your intention, your values moving up through the tree. And maybe just imagine in the trunk of the tree, it's like your understanding, your wisdom, if you like. It's a word that gets a little bit of flack, wisdom, but just maybe understanding everything that you've acquired by way of a sort of understanding of yourself, your mind, your body, relationships, the world. And then the branches, the leaves, really interacting with the rest of the world, moving out to the rest of the world, kind of like actions and words and speech. In dialogue with the other parts of the forest. So you experience yourself as rooted, wise, and integrally connected to everybody else listening to this webinar, all the people who are important in your life. And it may be that there's some weather or some wind or some birds, and a tree is more than able to flex and adapt and accommodate all of these things that go on in the wider world. And bigger shifts like seasons. Tree will change and transition through seasons. And just having the sense that we too can adapt to and weather as a verb here, weather different climates and seasons. And maybe from this place of being rooted, strong trunk with the intentions flowing through, sense of understanding, a sense of connection. Just asking, for me, what are the kind of key values that my roots are tapping into? What's important to me? What's meaningful to me? What's my kind of compass? What's my true north? And then maybe just bringing to mind the key relationships in your life. And I don't mean just the kind of lovely relationships, maybe the important ones that are also a bit challenging. How do you want to be in those relationships? How do you want to shape those relationships? Where do you want to set boundaries in those relationships? One small act, one small word, or one sort of small not spoken word, as we saw with Ling and her daughter at the time. And again, rooted, strong trunk, flexible branches, leaves connecting out to the wider world. What's important in your life in the wider world? What's meaningful to you? Where would you like to make a difference? What parts of your world do you shape? Might be a local church or a synagogue or a temple or a sports center or a workplace. It doesn't really matter. Whatever's important to you. How can you, in small ways, be the change you'd like to see in the world? And just let all of that go. Just come back to the sense of rooted, upright, flexible, strong, steadfast. Allowing sounds, thoughts, the landscape of the mind and body just to come and go like weather systems, little animals passing through the tree. Thank you. So I want to just end by naming that this is the last of 12 webinars over the course of a year, and it's been the most extraordinary privilege to be with all of you for this kind of hour-long session every month, and also to know that as it's been put out on YouTube and on Spotify and some of the other platforms, other people have listened and engaged and commented, and it's been an enormous privilege and a real pleasure to be a part of that. And really humbling as well. I mean, people sometimes say to me in my personal life, Willem, I've heard about this webinar, I've listened to this webinar, but I'm not sure you seem all that mindful in some parts of your life. And I kind of smile and laugh. And the people who know me really, really well, and have known me for a long time will say, well, it just, the kind of trajectory that my life might have taken could have been very different without the practice that I've had now for decades, and the retreats that I've sat, and the people around me who've shaped and been shaped by my mindfulness practice. And I hope the same is true for you, that with your practice, it's a way of a flashlight shining on your life, a befriending of your mind and body, finding of the beauty in the muddle, learning to fall down holes as we all inevitably do, but climb back out again. Coming to street junctions and knowing which ones to go down and which not to go down, to create the world we want to live in, but also the kind of world all of those who follow us are going to want to live in too. So the theme has been a life well lived, and just really to bring that kind of in a almost like a prescient kind of way to life. I was walking today down to the beach. I'm in northern Denmark, and there's I'm a bit of a fan of cemeteries. I always find them very contemplative spaces, and there was I started the first webinar with a gravestone that I came across of a woman's name on the Wainwright Way, on the coast to coast walk in England, of her name and a life well lived. So I came across another gravestone today of a woman called Ellie Bach. I guess it's a Danish name, and she lived from 1916 to 1979 here in Klitmøllet in Denmark. And the gravestone just says, "Thank you for everything." Thank you for everything. And on that note, it's a wonderful note, I think, to end the webinar on. Thank you all very much for your kind attention.